Have you ever been tempted to take a shortcut just to make something work? When have you felt the pull to use power, even good power, to protect yourself? Welcome to Your Week with St. Luke's, your weekly podcast from St. Luke's United Methodist Church in Orlando that invites you to go deeper with Scripture, to learn God's story, so that together we can live, love, and lead a life following Jesus to awaken disciples and reveal the kingdom. This episode kicks off our Lenten series called Crossroads, and Pastor Jad will walk us through Matthew chapter 4, verses 1 through 11, where Jesus meets temptation in the wilderness and shows us what love looks like even when it refuses false power. Let's jump right in.
Grace and peace, beloved, and welcome to another episode of Your Week with St. Luke's. It's me, Pastor Jad, with you as we're diving now fully into our Lenten sermon series, Crossroads. This is our second episode of the week, which is a rarity, but we had a special episode for Ash Wednesday, and if you missed that one, I encourage you to go back and listen to it because it sets things up pretty well for not only Ash Wednesday, but for our Lenten journey for us, beginning these 6 weeks towards Jerusalem, towards Easter Sunday, towards the cross and the empty tomb. And so, but here we are, the first Sunday of Lent, our text and our theme. And so the theme is of course, Crossroads, but it's also in the midst of Love University, our whole 2026 theme. And so this Sunday is Love 101, kind of like that university thing, resisting false power. And so that's what we're thinking about today with our text especially, which is Matthew chapter 4, verse 1 through 11. This is Matthew's temptation of Jesus. And so we begin in the wilderness, but before this text, before we interpret this text, before we begin to analyze it and I begin to walk us through it, I simply want us to hear it. And so here is Matthew chapter 4, verse 1 through 11. I'm going to be reading from my kind of favorite go-to translation right now, is the New Revised Standard Version, NRSV, and this is the updated edition. So hear these words. Then Jesus was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tested by the devil. He fasted for 40 days and 40 nights, and afterward he was famished. The tempter came and said to him, "If you are the Son of God, command these stones to become loaves of bread." But he answered, "It is written, one does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God." Then the devil took him to the holy city and placed him on the pinnacle of the temple, saying to him, "If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down, for it is written, He will command His angels concerning you, and on their hands they will bear you up, so that you will not dash your foot against a stone." Jesus said to him, "Again it is written, do not put the Lord your God to the test." Again, the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their splendor, and said to him, "All these I will give you if you will fall down and worship me." And Jesus said to him, "Away with you, Satan, for it is written, worship the Lord your God and serve only Him." Then the devil left him, and suddenly angels came and waited on him. Now, if we look at the text before our text, if you recall, it's always important to look at what's surrounding our text. We're given a small pericope, which is just pieces of verses. We got to look beyond it as well. So if we look before our text, we realize that this is a continuation of a story, that this story does not begin in the wilderness. It begins in the water at Jesus' baptism, where the heavens open and the Spirit descends and a voice declares, "This is my Son, the Beloved, with whom I am well pleased." And then immediately, Matthew tells us that Jesus is led by the same Spirit into the wilderness to be tested. So the same Spirit that descended at the Jordan now drives him into the wilderness. This is not an accident. This is vocation. So a few things. The Greek verb used here is pyrazine, and it can mean to tempt. It also can mean to test. God, through the Spirit, intends to test. The tempter, Hasatan, Satan, intends to distort. The same wilderness, a different intention. And what is being tested is not whether Jesus is the Son of God. See, in English we hear, if you are the Son of God, but the Greek word here, which is the ei, if you will, in English, it can just as easily mean since. So, since you are the Son of God. So the issue with this scene, of what's happening here, is not identity. The issue is meaning. What does it mean to be the Son of God? And even more so, what kind of son will Jesus be? So Matthew frames this story in a lot of fascinating ways, and most of them are deliberately paralleling Israel's story. If you notice, 40 days and 40 nights Jesus fasts, right? That is an obvious allusion to Moses and Elijah, and especially allusions to Israel's wandering for 40 years, right? Israel passes through the water into wilderness. Jesus passes through the water of the Jordan into wilderness. Israel is called God's son in Exodus, and Jesus is named God's son at the Jordan. Israel was tested and failed. Jesus is tested and remains faithful. And notice this, every response that Jesus gives comes from Deuteronomy, specifically from passages reflecting on Israel's wilderness failures. So this is not random. This is intentional, and it is theological. Jesus recapitulates Israel's story and is rewriting what it means to be faithful. The first test, then, comes in hunger. The text says, since you are the Son of God, right, command these stones to become bread. Now, on the surface, that seems reasonable. Hunger is real. And later in Matthew, Jesus will feed thousands. But here, the question is not about feeding others. It is about using divine power to secure yourself. Selfishness, self-aggrandizing, self-support. Israel grumbled about manna in the wilderness. They doubted. They demanded proof of provision. Jesus responds with Deuteronomy 8, verse 3. One does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God. See, the temptation is not about carbs, right? It's not about sustenance. It's about trust. Will sonship be defined by self-sufficiency or by dependency? About companionship and relying and following in the lordship of God. The second test shifts to the temple. Now, in Luke, the temple test is the last test. But here in Matthew, it's the second. And the tempter, Hasatan, Satan, the devil, however you want to define that, quotes Psalm 91. So now we have Scripture debating Scripture. Since you are the Son of God, throw yourself down. This is about spectacle, about forcing God's hand, about proving divine favor in public. And Jesus responds with Deuteronomy 6, verse 16. Do not put the Lord your God to the test. That reference goes back to Massah in Exodus 17, when Israel demanded, the quote is the Lord among us or not? The deeper temptation here is manipulation. Prove it. Show up on command. Rescue me on my terms. And Jesus refuses to turn trust into performance. He will not treat God as a means of self-validation. I want to pause for a moment there to think about, how many times religious leaders have used their position and power in ways of performance. How they have treated God as a means of self-validation. They don't respond to the temptation that well. They fall into the trap. And here Jesus gives us the example of what it means to not be someone who tests and tempts God, who seeks to trust more than to perform, and doesn't seek self-validation, self-gratification, self-importance, self-righteousness. The third test, then, has us now on a very high mountain. In Matthew's gospel, mountains are places of revelation throughout. And there is an echo of Sinai, again, where Moses received Torah on the mountain. From this height, all the kingdoms of the world, the text says, and their splendor are on display. All these I will give you if you will fall down and worship me. This is not cartoonish evil. This is empire. This is the temptation to rule the kingdoms of the world, to assume the role of Caesar, the Roman emperor, to accept the logic of power as it already exists in the world of Jesus' day and in the world of ours today. And in Deuteronomy 6:13, the command to worship God alone is immediately followed by a warning not to follow other gods. You see, in the first century, Jewish people understood the gods of the nations as evil or demonic powers. And so this is not just about bowing physically. It is about allegiance. Will Jesus align himself with the powers that be? Will he accomplish good ends by compromising means? This temptation would have been painfully real to Matthew's first hearers. Participation in political and economic life often required small acts of idolatry, a subtle accommodation, a quiet compromise. I wonder if those of us who live in 2026 can relate to those required small acts of idolatry, that subtle accommodation to the powers that be, a quiet compromise to that's just the way the world works. Jesus refuses. He will not ride on two horses, as the stories tell about the great kings and emperors. He will not build the kingdom by mirroring empire. He will not seize authority apart from obedience. And notice the irony. He refuses to turn stones to bread, but in the end, angels minister to him, serve him. The allusion there is serving him, feeding him. He refuses to force angelic rescue, and in the end, the angels attend to him. He refuses to grasp kingdoms. And after the resurrection, he will say, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me, but only after the cross and the tomb. The underlying temptation in all three moments, these scenes within this story, is this. Will Jesus treat God as less than God? Will he mistrust provision, manipulate protection, compromise worship? Love 101 begins here, because love refuses false power. Love does not grasp. Love does not manipulate. Love does not compromise allegiance. Love trusts. And Lent is a season of learning to trust again. We may not speak to visible tempters. We are not whisked off to temple pinnacles. But we know the deeper pull in our daily lives. The pull to secure ourselves at any cost. The pull to demand visible proof. The pull to bow slightly in order to get ahead. So here is our Lenten practice for this week. As we read this text in our Life Together groups, as we read this text individually, notice where you feel the urge to grasp control. Notice in your life where you are tempted to force outcomes. Notice where allegiance becomes divided. And instead of shaming yourself, pause. Ask, what would trust look like here? Then choose one act, one small act of relinquishment, of letting go. One small act of trust. One quiet refusal of false power. The wilderness, my friends, is not punishment. It is formation. The Spirit leads Jesus there, not to break us. And the Spirit leads us there, not to break us, but to clarify who we are, beloved children. Learning again to worship and serve God alone. I'd love to hear your thoughts and ideas about your conversations around Matthew 4, chapter 1, verse 11. And I hope this time has enriched your reading and your conversation with your small group. And I pray that I'll see you on Sunday as we gather together, read this text, and worship the living God.